The whole point of Q is that Q was supposed to be the savior. Like, the invention of Q, the awakening of Q, was because Q could already see what was going to occur. I don't think Q would exist without basically wherever human beings are, there is violence. There's no, humanity is fucked. We're all doomed. I would say that the violence in America, it's all in the work. Q is born out of that chaos. He's basically born of rage and genuinely, or delusionally maybe, was putting himself forward as like the savior of America. What's actually occurred is that no one cared. No one cares about, it would seem, anything anymore. I think that, unfortunately, the elite, sort of the way the elite exists now in current society, it's just created a completely sort of apathetical contentment, and therefore everybody sort of is fairly comfortable for their own little short period of time. Basically, the piece that started it all, because it was the one that was made alongside the candidate, it was an important starting point for Q, and also a relevant point to using sort of the idea of taking H.W. Griffith's, Ku Klux Klan film and bringing it into sort of a two-dimensional art sort of arena. Candidate was the original piece, the piece that began it all. But the important thing that happened during the Candidate was, whilst finding all of the materials to make it, I started to realize that the background was becoming more important than the foreground. So we had propaganda posters. So there are a series of posters from the 70s. You could call it like the conspiracy trilogy of Alan J. Pakula. So we had the Parallax View, 3 Days of the Condor, and All the President's Men. And it was the idea of putting posters behind the artwork so that you could actually incorporate a bit more content that way. I read Jeffrey Toobin's book, Homegrown. But the first half of the book is sort of a thrill ride about Timothy McVeigh and, his quest for annihilating people in the name of the Gadsden snake and all the... Well, actually, it was more to do with Ruby Ridge and all the sort of... that was kind of the origins of the sort of right-wing militia. And then the second half of the book explains why all of that then became relevant with the storming of the Capitol. 1621. Yeah, one of the bigger pieces in the show, the statue of Lincoln, was something that I've thought about for a long time. In fact, a lot of these works were works that Ben Turnbull could have made 5-6 years ago if he had had the money, and he might have made them three-dimensionally. So a lot of these ideas were then, if you give them to Q turns them into something two-dimensional, easier to make, quicker to make, and what turns out to be more impactful. Tricky one. I think that's Q in his element, really. Turnbull's totally disregarded at that point. Imagine if you were to do fuzzy felt as art. I think the nice thing about it politically was that it was also, it basically was a premonition of the assassination attempts that were about to happen on Donald Trump, because the work was made before then. MAGA Buck is the reinvention of the dollar bill. Again, a prophecy piece, really. What's the future American dollar bill look like was really the beginning. But again, it had a lot of layers to that work. Difficult work to make. Turnbull, very important in terms of the technical side. But Q, in his element, doing these central circles where the main action's taking place. What happened was Q by then was in full flow. He basically dreamt it one morning, and he basically took all of the sort of fascist elements of having Nazi flowers. He took that from a sculpture idea and somehow put it together in a field with Julie Andrews. I mean, and the humor that Q brings to it, Turnbull could not have done that. Again, it's bringing in the character of Q. He needs to have more of an identity. We need to find out more about where he's coming from. And again, using some of those old Turnbull ideas, Turnbull's used Superman, again and again. But what would happen if you wanted to sort of cue it up, as it were? So it's just a restyling, quite a simple piece, but you just need to get more of the identity of Q out there. It's sort of almost like a reinvention of another work, which was called Twilight's Last Gleaming. But the difference with MAGA World is that the outside is actually connecting with the inside because of the Superman blowing the bubbles. Q began to take all of basically Turnbull's offcuts and start putting them in. And funnily enough, the offcuts tended to be front covers. So they're glossy, makes it a much more impactful piece of work. Probably the most technical Q could get. This is the piece where the posters started to become important, during the whole process of the project, because if you're actually going to do a whole project that's based on putting posters out on the street, I thought, well, why don't we actually have an actual solid artwork that's going to be, technically pulled off, where you can actually show what you're actually doing out there in the States. I actually quite like Q-Screen, almost like it's a television, the way you view it through a TV screen. I wanted something that would rage. I was thinking about something almost that you would have, when I conceived the idea, I thought you'd always have like Vote Q above it or something like that. It was a piece, a sort of a call to arms piece, really. Yeah, Liberty Once Lost, Lost Forever. The title taken from a Sam Adams quote, if I'm correct. Probably the most poignant piece in the show. I'm not sure I would ever be as capable as Q has been in order to make something as poignant and as heartbreaking as that. But its actual origins are to do with the Planet of the Apes statue is actually what I want. The difference here is that I want that statue to look like it's rising as opposed to being sunken down. It's about an uprising, but taking a very sort of tragic background and then immersing those two kind of worlds together. I think that's it. It could be seen as slightly controversial to do that, but it felt right. I don't like work that's preachy. I don't like being preached to either. I think there's a lot of qualitative learning in Q's work, which actually virtually subconsciously as well. Where I don't know if Q is part of the art world. I don't think he comes from that world. But I do believe that Q has kind of ripped that sort of textbook up and he's just annihilating it now with a massive fucking hammer. He's just smashing the shit out of that mirror that's so-called reflected society.